Hello, I'm your instructor, Mr. Norcott-Mahany, and we are going to do Chapter 8. So it'd be 5 things for Chapter 8. So Chapter 8 is about Apollo and Artemis, and they are a complementary pair. So they are twins. They're fraternal twins. The children of Leto and of Zeus. And they tend to be sort of opposites of one another. So if you remember we did structuralism here. You've got Apollo is male, Artemis is female. He's associated with sort of civilization. She's associated with the wild. They both have bows, but he is an archer. She is more a huntress, right? So those are different sort of. So you have this sort of setup, this polar opposite. He sings, she dances, so forth. Apollo is sometimes seen as the epitome of male excellence, and Artemis is associated with girls, but specifically with girls sort of as wild things, right? So once they become tamed by marriage, then they are under the sort of protection of Hera and Aphrodite, and not of Artemis herself. The main literary selection, they have a small hymn to Artemis, which they identify as hymn number 27, but it's actually hymn number 9. In the module you can see hymn 27. I've provided that. That's sort of a mistake. So the 2 hymns to Artemis are both very short. But Homeric hymn number 3 is one of the long poems. It's to Apollo, and it's really 2 hymns, sometimes called Homeric hymn 3a to Delian Apollo, and Homeric hymn 3b to Pythian Apollo. So how did this sort of happen, that there are 2 hymns, but they're sort of published as one? The manuscripts we have are all relatively late. I mean, 9th or 10th century CE. And so there was a collection of these Homeric hymns, maybe going back to late antiquity, but at some point there had been 2 hymns to Apollo right next to each other, and then they got merged as one because it was here's the hymn to Apollo, here's another hymn to Apollo. Oh, it must be the same hymn, and somehow they get split, but they must be the same. They clearly are not. 3A, I think, has a more maybe comic tone. 3B is a little more serious. 3B is longer, and 3A has a clear coda. So the closing passage of a piece of music is the coda. So here we have a clear coda, and the coda is the poet, the singer, addressing the audience, and he says, if people come to you and ask who is the best poet, tell them that it's a blind man from Chios, presumably the singer himself. So it's like a little ad for himself. That makes no sense coming in the middle of the hymn, right? So clearly that is the end of the first poem before we move into the Pythian. So the first one deals with the birth of Apollo. The second deals with Apollo setting up his shrine at Delphi by defeating the Pytho, hence Pythian Apollo. I'm glad that actually we have both parts, because Maurizio, the first edition, only had 3b and didn't indicate that it was really only the second part of a work that was longer. So I'm glad to see we have both of them. The scholarship deals with ritual and how ritual is set up. So the connection of myth and ritual and how that appears in initiation. And I want to call special attention to Arnold van Gennep's schema. So Van Gennep looked at ritual, specifically rituals of elevation. So there are different types of rituals. There are rituals that of elevation. Those are ones that after you've done the ritual, after you've undergone the ritual, you come out changed. So marriage would be an example of a ritual of elevation. You go into it, you're single, you come out, you're married. right? I mean, physically you're the same person, all that stuff. And you may have been living with the person for a while, so it may not actually change that much. But it does change in the sense of like legally now you're married, and that has certain benefits and obligations that you didn't necessarily have when you were not married. Now you have more formal connection than you did before. Puberty rituals would be another sort of instance where you come out and you're viewed as a man, and the ones that are primarily talked about in this section are those that deal with boys becoming men or girls becoming women. So those are the main ones, but those are rituals of elevation where there's a change. Army boot camp would be a ritual of elevation, or the sort of hazing rituals that you might go through in a college fraternity or sorority. That would also be an elevation ritual, right? You come out, you're different. You're now part of the house. Before you were sort of a wannabe, but now you're an actual part. So that movement. There are some rituals of inversion. Those tend to be temporary. So like the Dionysiac rituals that we'll see in chapter 9, those are temporary, like Mardi Gras, right? You can go to Mardi Gras, it happens every year. You can participate in it, you can let loose, but then you go back to your regular life, right? Nothing really changed. You had this moment of wildness in the middle, but nothing's really changed. And Van Gennep looked at these rituals and said there are basically 3 steps or 3 parts to the ritual. There's separation, and that separation can be very simple. It can be simply that you go to a special place. So you leave your home or wherever and you go to a special place. So, for some like native people, the ritual of elevation where boy becomes man take place like in the woods. And so you leave like the town and you go into the woods. Separation. The second part, the limen, the threshold part, that is the actual, like, whatever the difficulty of the ritual is, that's it. So it's the marriage ceremony, it's the boot camp, it's, whatever it happens to be. You go through this ordeal, and that's the middle part. The third part is the reintegration of the person into society, but now they're changed, right? They're no longer a boy, they're now a man, which means they can do things that men can do. They can vote, they can be on the assembly, they can, be elected to politics, they can be judges, they can be other things that they couldn't be when they were boys, right? So that movement. So separation, the ordeal, and then the reintegration. And that's a good way of looking sort of at ritual. And it makes sense. And you can look at some of the stuff with Apollo and Artemis in this chapter and see, yes, that definitely follows that 3-part ritual scheme. The comparison in chapter 8 is called an Ephesian tale. It's a selection from the very beginning by Xenophon. Now, first of all, it's unlike all the other ones. All the other ones were either from the Middle East or from Egypt, or later we'll see from Rome. This is another Greek story, right? The Ephesian tale is in Greek. It was written by a Greek author living in the city of Ephesus. So in that sense, it doesn't quite fit. There was a main temple to Artemis at Ephesus, which is, and this work, an Ephesian tale, it's an ancient romance. Ancient romances are what become novels. So the birth of novels really starts with these Greek romances. They're written in prose. They tell a story of like pretty regular folk. The Greek romance pattern is similar to the romance pattern in modern romances. Boy meets girl, and of course now it doesn't have to be that. It could be boy meets boy or girl meets girl. It does not have to be specific to heterosexuality, but the Greek ones are. A boy meets girl, the two fall in love, something happens to separate them, they spend the rest of the work, or most of the rest of the work, undergoing various ordeals to get back together, which happens then in the final section. So they're reunited, happy ending. So boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again, happy ending, right? That's this sort of setup. I'm glad that it's in here because it is there were a lot of these Greek romances, and we have half dozen or so Greek romances, so we've got enough of a chunk that we can actually talk about them with some authority. I don't know if any of them are great literature in the sense that the other works we look at are, but they were very popular. We know that. And keep in mind, books had to be copied by hand, and so for these books to survive in any number means that there had to have been thousands of copies made over time, and that says something about the staying power of these romances. That said, there's not really much in this selection that says much about Artemis or even Artemis at Ephesus. So in that sense, I think it doesn't quite fit. It doesn't do what Maurizio says it really should do. But it's there. And then the reception or the Nachleben section is Daphne and contemporary poetry. Now, Daphne is one of Apollo's loves. There's only one poem here, a poem by Alicia Stallings. It's too bad that they do not provide the poem by Evan Boland, who's an Irish poet, which also deals with the Daphne figure. But Daphne is a young woman. She's a nymph. Her father is the river god. Apollo was kidding Cupid or Eros. Since we get this in Ovid's Metamorphoses, it's really the Latin stuff, so Cupid would be the name for the little love god. And Eros, or Cupid, is playing with his bow and arrow, and of course he's like a little kid, and he's got his little bow and arrow, little toy bow and arrow. And Apollo says, that's not a real bow and arrow. Let me show you what a real bow and arrow can do. And then Cupid gets really upset and basically says, let me show you what this can do. And he shoots Apollo with his love arrow. Apollo is looking, as it turns out, at Daphne. He falls madly in love with Daphne. Cupid then complicates things even further by shooting Daphne with a leaden arrow, or an arrow that has a reverse effect, so she hates Apollo. So you have a Pepe Le Pew situation, right? He's following and she's trying to escape. Right, so that's the setup we have for the Daphne story. And for us in the 21st century, right, this is basically stalking, right? This is something we really don't like to think about because it is pretty creepy. But in the story, what happens is Daphne, who wants to remain a virgin, prays to her father, who's the river god, and says, could you do something so that Apollo cannot basically sexually assault me? And what happens is she turns into a laurel tree. And Apollo catches her, but when he catches her, she's already a tree, and so he can't have sex with her, but he says, this tree will always be my tree. So, and the laurel was associated with Apollo. When people competed in athletic or musical events at Delphi, and they did have them every 4 years, the winner would get a wreath of laurel leaves. So laurel is associated with Apollo and with poetry, partly because, the story explains why that is. The name Daphne in Greek means laurel. So in one sense, it would be better if the story were of Apollo and Laurel, a girl named Laurel who turns into a laurel tree, right? We would see that more easily. So that's the stuff for Chapter 8. The next time we will be looking at stuff from Chapter 9, which deals with Dionysus and with Euripides' play The Bacchae. See you next time.